All right. How we doing? Okay. So here at the end of the semester, I'm kind of covering things that are a little bit tangential to what we think of as traditional habitat management. We talked about rangeland. That's not tangential out west, but it is here. And urban wildlife management is an area that's quickly growing. We might think, well, yeah, I guess you got to do urban wildlife management, but most wildlife habitat is not in urban areas. The best habitat is anywhere except urban areas. So how important is it really? Well, it's important in a variety of different ways. One consideration is, well, first of all, if we're wanting to maximize the bang for our buck with regard to providing habitat for the greatest diversity and abundance of wildlife, probably the best place to do it is not in our cities. On the other hand, our cities are growing and taking up more and more space. And as otherwise good quality wildlife habitat becomes less and less available, the potential for any piece of land, any given piece of land, whether it's urban or rural, becomes more valuable. So we have to take advantage of every space we have. And the other consideration is this: 90% of wildlife management is managing what?
People.
People. And people, most people are in urban environments. So there is a tremendous amount of interest in wildlife in urban hubs. Now we can say, yeah, that's fine, we'll help you with a little urban project or two, but it's not as important as what we're doing out on the WMAs and out on the farms in the rural areas, and that might be true. But if you want the support of the public, you've got to work with the public, and you got to work with them where they are. I deal with this myself on a regular basis in that there are a lot of people in the little community of Martin, for example, who are extremely interested in wildlife habitat management. And they ask me to come talk to their groups, and they call me up and ask for advice, and they want me to be involved in different organizations and getting things started. Things like creating a greenway through the city of Martin. So I'm in the Brian Brown Greenway Foundation that created this greenway. Things like being on the board of the Martin Tree Board. I have been on the Martin Tree Board, and I consult with the president of the Martin Tree Board regularly, and other such groups. So we can disregard or ignore those groups, but only at our peril, because if we lose the support of those people, if we kind of belittle their efforts, yes, sure, fine, it's nice to do a no-mow May in your little lawn in your little town, but that's a drop in the bucket of the pollinator habitat that's being produced out in the countryside. Well, that's not what they want to hear. What they have to work with is the little bit of space where they are. So we have to recognize that, while at the same time recognizing that what we're doing at a larger scale out in the countryside, is especially significant. So there's unique considerations when it comes to managing wildlife in urban hubs. And I want to talk about some of that stuff. Okay. Well, for starters, whose responsibility is wildlife in the cities? Same as wildlife in the countries. In the country, if it's endangered or migratory, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and if it's not, it's the State Wildlife Agency, and Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency is responsible for wildlife in Tennessee, including in the cities. But there's limited options for how we can manage wildlife in the cities, right? We have primarily private property. We have built environments that severely restrict what we can do and what we can't do. So what are some of the primary things that we have to focus on, that we have to keep in mind in cities? Well, a big part of it, is damage, right? Mitigating damage that wildlife causes to humans on our property, be it, wildlife vehicle collisions, be it wildlife damaging landscaping or getting into or roosting on buildings or a million other things like that, but also mitigating damage that humans cause on wildlife in terms of fragmenting their habitat and the potential to disperse and migrate and other factors like that, spreading diseases, etc. Given all this, there are some unique, novel things that we can do and take advantage of. One thing is we think about how to take advantage of creating opportunities for wildlife in cities, is that it's a lot easier to plan ahead than it is to undo something that's been done and do it over, right? It's a whole lot easier to put a greenway plan in place and let a city build up around that greenway than it is to place a greenway into an already built infrastructure, right? Or it's a whole lot easier to build a bridge that has a wildlife-friendly underpass than it is to take out a culvert and put in a bridge 20 years later. So progressive prior planning is really important. Sorry about that alliteration there. There's a lot of ways to think about that. Many of the things that benefit wildlife also benefit cities and whatever's downstream of those cities. If a city drains their wetlands, for example, they might not be dealing with the impact of that, but all those impervious surfaces means that runoff water is going to go somewhere, and it's going to probably go downstream and cause downstream flooding, and any contaminants associated with that runoff is going to get in the downstream water as well. So it's going to affect fisheries and aquatic stuff. If a city, as it builds, can incorporate the aquatic system and its associated floodplain to absorb a good deal of the runoff, that can lower the amount of downstream flooding and runoff and impacts from impurities and such. Does the wildlife agency easily make that happen? Not so easily. I mean, they can if they have a wildlife management area, and they work hard politically to keep hold of it. The city's probably going to try to take that from them. But what that calls for is extremely clear thinking and communication and forming partnerships with the city planners, with the regional planners, with the State Department of Environment and Conservation, with others, to make clear the benefit of holding to keeping habitat in the wetland areas of the city to absorb stormwater runoff. The city's going to save money. The region, the county is going to save money. The state is going to save money. The city is going to look in the future to that area as a gemstone of their city that they can take pride in and that they will value. And if they disregard it now, and if they try to drain it now or build up right up to its borders right now, then so much of the potential of that area will be lost in the future. The stuff I'm talking about here is not so meat and potatoes as how many pounds per acre you plant for switchgrass. This is much more broad conceptual thinking. But do you see the importance? Do you see the value of it? What's better about the left window than the right windows? Can you tell?
There's nowhere for pigeons to perch on.
Yeah. We have windowsills, at a 45-degree angle, so those birds can't perch. As cities contract with or create codes for new constructions, new buildings in the city, can they write into their codes that high-rise buildings downtown, have to have these characteristics that will minimize pigeon roosts and the damage associated with that, the city will thank the wildlife consultants in the future for that, because they're not going to have the foresight typically to think of that, you know, as they're working with companies. They're just trying to get somebody to come in and build high rises and be happy to have them. They'll be a whole lot happier if you write these conditions into your code up front. But is that the job of the wildlife agency? No, it's not. So, how does our profession, if our profession thinks that it would be valuable to work with cities to get these types of codes written, then how does our profession do that? How do we see to it that it's done? Do we create a new job within the wildlife agency of a biologist who goes around to the cities and just tries to convince them that it's a good idea? Or do we try to get laws passed by the state legislature that says any city that's going to get any state funding to help with any building projects must follow these codes? Or do we, what do we do? Do we provide best management practices for cities and offer them for cities to follow, that we just suggest it would be good for you, you'll be happy if you do? What's the best way to do it? These are things to think about. But right now, nobody has that responsibility, so it's mostly not being done. Who's heard of the urban wildland interface? Anybody heard that term before? We hear it more in the West, and where I see it particularly is in states where there's a good bit of wildland, public land. For example, in Oregon or California, where Oregon had 14 national forests, it's 50% public land. California, where you have national forests that butt right up against large urban areas. Here in the, hey, that's what I was looking for. Glad to have that. Here in the Oregon Cascades, there's some towns on the east slope of the Cascades that have really grown, and they just butt right up next to the national forest. Think perhaps like Gatlinburg, okay? Now we might not think of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park as true wildland because there's just so many people there, but there is some real wildland there, okay? And where you have that just true wilderness, butting right up to some really growing urban hubs, you have potential for things like bears roaming around in suburbia, or mountain lions roaming around in strip malls and stuff like that. So you have increased potential for human-wildlife interactions and potentially conflicts. So we use terms that like wildland is considered 0 to 2% developed, 0 buildings per hectare. How big is a hectare?
2.47.
Right, and give me a visualization about how big is that? As big as a what?
Football field.
Yeah, kind of a football fieldish. Okay, yeah. So no buildings less than 1 human per hectare. Rural, urban, 5 to 20% developed, 30 to 50%, over 50% developed. Less than 2.5 to 10, over 10 buildings per hectare. 1 to 10 or over 10 people per hectare. So we think of wildland area, rural or ex-urban, which is, you know, kind of like where I live or the edge of Martin. Suburban could be, you know, edges of Martin. Urban is right in the middle of I mean, Martin would barely meet urban, probably, but places would. So a lot of areas are growing. The southeastern United States is one of the fastest growing areas of the country, right? And fast growth means quickly taking away wildlife habitat, which means wildlife is rapidly being displaced, which means you often have a lot of animals moving around with no home range, not knowing where they're going. So you have a lot of potential for interactions between wildlife and people, wildlife and pets, wildlife and vehicles, right? There's also a lot of impervious surfaces, roads, sidewalks, parking lots, building roofs. So there's a lot of runoff. And there's also a lot of heat absorption, so cities tend to be warmer. And that means more heat stress for people and wildlife in the summer. And it also means heat refugia for some species in the winter. So you might wonder, are there any possible reasons why there might be large flocks of starlings and blackbirds and grackles in urban environments in the winter? Part of it could be that it's a couple degrees warmer, and a couple degrees warmer to a bird when it's 20 degrees outside could easily be the difference between life and death. So that makes a big difference. Rivers are valuable to everybody, aren't they? They're valuable to farmers because that's the most rich soil, because rivers flood and drop their nutrients, so the soil is full of organic matter and nutrients. Rivers are valuable to industry because they provide shipping lanes. Rivers are valuable to cities because they provide, again, those same shipping lanes to bring products into and out of cities, as well as a water supply, as well as a place to cart off their wastes. And of course, rivers are valuable to wildlife, as travel corridors and some of our richest habitats. Those rivers are in competition. Wildlife historically has taken it on the chin because we all take it from wildlife. But if we can plan our cities with particular regard to protecting all of our streams and rivers and cities in a variety of ways, that's good and important. Air pollution, particulate matter is higher in cities, ozone pollution. Light pollution, you guys are familiar with, right? It occurs in cities, disrupts bird migration, disrupts timing of spring events, of breeding, of daily waking and birdsong, disrupts sea turtles on coasts and many other things, right? And noise pollution can dampen ability of some animals to hear other animals calling to defend their territory or to attract mates. And that dampening can cause lower success in fitness and survival. So those are all issues in cities, and some cities are getting progressive about that. And they're building codes that say street lights now have to be facing down and can only be within a certain visible light wave range that has less of an impact on birds. So that's good. And if our profession can shine a light on that sort of research and those sorts of policies, that's my dad joke for the day, might have more, then we're doing nothing but good. Actually woke you up, I was losing you guys for a second there. Okay. If that's what it takes. Dad jokes for the rest of the day. Okay. Other things to think about. So we have more food. We have people feeding wildlife. Oh, there's a deer in my backyard. I'm gonna go get some deer corn from Walmart and get more. Lawns that are watered and fertilized and cultivated to stay nice and green all year round, to provide year-round forage for deer, for example, or turkeys. Landscaping, a variety of evergreen landscaping that provides nutritious forage and browse for wildlife. Pet food left out for the other mesomammals, so kind. Trash left out for the bears and trash pandas and other animals. Gardens throughout the year. All of these things provide opportunities for wildlife to take advantage of. It also provides great potential for spread of disease, for conflict with pets, for interactions with people, and those interactions are sometimes cool and sometimes often not. Humans are just our presence in our homes can cause many species of wildlife to leave. There are usually fewer predators in urban environments. And where there are predators, that's its own set of issues. Coyotes eating kittens and puppies off the back porch and such. But typically when predators are reduced, that means increased prey densities. And often without the ability to hunt, we lose the ability to control those prey species. The climate is moderated, like I said. It tends to, or sometimes it's moderated, sometimes it's made worse. But in the wintertime, often it's warmer in cities. But it's often warmer in the summer too. So roads serve to increase vehicle wildlife accidents, and they also serve to fragment the habitat for many species. They're less likely to cross roads, so that slows dispersal and migration corridors. Windows provide more bird strike opportunities. Window sills provide more roosting opportunities. Culverts provide limited opportunities for wildlife to pass under the road, therefore increasingly forces wildlife over the road and increasingly causes wildlife vehicle mortalities. Bridges often create potential for degrading the quality of the stream bed and often of the water downstream of the bridge. Buildings cause all the problems that buildings cause that I've been talking about. Usually in cities, we don't allow dead wood to accumulate, so snags they're chopped down. We don't like to land because they're a liability, and logs are cleaned up. So that's less habitat for herpetofauna, less habitat for small mammals, less foraging habitat for many bird species. We all know about cats, and we know there's more cats in cities. We know that cities fragment the landscape, and cities result in much lower diversity of vegetation. So what you have is much lower diversity of wildlife, but the wildlife that can live there tend to be a whole lot of them. So greater abundance, but lower diversity. And it's often abundance of our selected, invasive, often exotic pest species. Well, I've already kind of alluded to this, that we've got this disconnect. We've got urban policymakers, urban planners that usually have no interest in, familiarity with, knowledge about, or even awareness of good urban policy for wildlife. Incorporating wildlife considerations into urban policy that helps both wildlife and the efficient functioning of the city. So that begs the question: who's deciding, and who should be deciding, if there are riparian buffers along the streams in the limits of a city, and how wide those buffers should be, and what are the rules for those buffers? Do we say no timber harvest at all? Do we allow timber harvest a little bit? Do we plant stuff? Do we keep it in early successional vegetation? Who makes the rules regarding overpasses and underpasses? Who says, no, if it's this big, it should not be a culvert, it should be a bridge with enough ground on either side of the stream bed so that wildlife can pass under the road to decrease deer vehicle collisions? Who says that we should have policies regarding our buildings, policies regarding our trash, what kind of receptacles, how often trash should be picked up so that you don't attract bears or whatever? Who says where subdivisions and businesses should be zoned, where industrial parks should be allowed to be or to grow, where city parks or greenways should be, if there to be any at all? Who says where new roads can go, and what are the characteristics of those roads? Do they need to have shoulders? Do we need to put, if they're divided roads, do we put good vegetation in the middle to provide habitat for birds? Or might that actually provide habitat for all wildlife that attracts them to the middle and they get hit by cars trying to get to it? Who says whether we let those wetlands stay or whether we try to drain them and mitigate and create an artificial wetland somewhere else? Or do we create impoundments for waterfowl at the edges of our cities and for water birds. Planning and zoning commissions. That's who say a lot of this stuff. City planners who meet on a regular basis with planning and zoning commissions. Towns and cities have them. Counties have them too. You know the most common non-governmental official, the employment status, the job category of most people on planning and zoning commissions that are not government employees? In my experience, real estate agents. Does that make sense?
It does if you're someone else takes.
That's exactly the right answer. That's exactly the right answer. Sure. And what's the benefit of a real estate agent to a real estate agent of being on the city planning and zoning commission?
More land for more business.
I know where to buy some cheap land. I buy that cheap land. Now, I have a vested interest in getting that land converted from a non-residential zone to a commercial zone or a residential multiple family housing zone, so I can build apartment complexes or duplexes on it. And all of a sudden my land is worth a whole lot more money, right? That, people, is a conflict of interest, is it not? Yeah, absolutely. And where is wildlife at the table? Has anybody heard me talk about Brian Check? Brian Check is retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington, D.C., where he was a conservation biologist. Within the Wildlife Society, he created a working group that was active for a couple decades called the Local Governance Working Group. And he argued that the wildlife profession, wildlife professionals, should take it upon themselves to become involved in local policy. Most city planning and zoning commissions, you can volunteer and eventually get on the planning and zoning commission. It doesn't take too much to get on it. Now, some of them are different, some are more complex, and you have to be elected or selected. But with work, you can make that happen. Or you can have it written in the code that there must be a natural resource representative on the commission or something, right? And that local governance working group was about trying to encourage the profession, to encourage its membership. Wherever you live, get involved locally. And that's all about urban wildlife management. Now, whose job is wildlife? Whose responsibility is wildlife? The State Wildlife Agency. Does any state wildlife agency typically involve itself in this process? No. And in a lot of ways, it probably makes sense, because a state wildlife agency, this can become a very political process, and they can sure get a black eye doing so. But an individual person, not as a representative of the government agency, but as a representative of the profession, might do a lot of good. What makes this a hard sell? What's in it for the real estate agent? Cold hard cash. What's in it for the wildlife professional? Feeling in their heart that they've made the world a better place. Maybe. Hopefully. Right? It's just taking time out of your life that you don't have, that you might not have. So it's doing the right thing is all that is. There's no structure in place to compensate for this, to pay for it, right? But beside the City Planning and Zoning Commission, there's other ways. Civic organizations, boards, like I said, the Martin Tree Board, that's a voluntary board. Anybody can be a part of it. There's a group called Martin Beautiful. They're more about encouraging people to keep nice homes and landscaping. And I've always, I've done a couple things with them. They've asked me to do a couple things before. And they, for example, know that when I come, I'm going to shake my finger at them because they don't value natives as much as they should. Natives is a meaningless word to them. Natives are no better than invasive exotics to these guys. You know, they would just as happily plant a Bradford pear as a white oak. Some of them. So yeah, I do involve myself with those guys occasionally, just to try to help them recognize that, the most beautiful landscape is a landscape that's representative of our culture here in West Tennessee. And you don't do that by planting ginkgos. You do that by planting our native vegetation that we celebrate and take pride in that's not native anywhere else. So getting involved in those types of organizations, I think, can have real value. Agency outreach and education programs, yes. I was in a conversation with somebody recently. One of the things most state wildlife agencies are just absolutely strapped for cash, and TWRA is no exception, as Jeremy knows better than anybody in the room. And most state wildlife agencies are. There's a couple of exceptions. Missouri's always been pretty doggone good. One of the things I most look forward to about the day that I hope in the not too distant future when we receive more funding from something like Recovering America's Wildlife Act will be that the agency will hopefully be able to expend more resources on outreach. The historical model for TWRA that goes back many decades is that each region has an information and education coordinator. And in Region 1 in West Tennessee, that one person gets thousands of requests from all over West Tennessee to come set up a booth at our fair, to come set up a booth here, to come talk to our high school students about jobs here, to come do this here. And where do most of those requests come from in Region 1 in West Tennessee to the I&E coordinator? They come from Memphis and Jackson. And if and when they come from Martin, Tennessee, an hour up the road, I might have time once or twice, maybe 3 times a year to come up there, but I'm too busy the rest of the time, right? And we've got dozens of little towns where the wildland urban interface could really benefit from somebody from the agency to speak on behalf of the agency. So those education and outreach programs have tremendous potential to do much, much more than they've done. I understand they haven't been able to do much because they're just so limited. There's only so much one person can do. And then looking at partnerships, can a wildlife agency partner with the city? Can a nonprofit group partner with a federal agency or a couple of nonprofit groups together, or a coalition of groups get together to work with the city to create a greenway along their river, where they see that the urban growth is encroaching on that river, and the best way to protect that river is to create a greenway before it gets any worse, right? There's so much that can be done. And guys, when you graduate and get a job and get told this is what you're supposed to do, your first thought is, I graduated and I got a job. Look, Mom and Dad, I'm gainfully employed. And yes, sir, boss, I'm going to do just what you say, right? And once you get that under your belt, then the next thing I hope that you might do is ask yourself, okay, as a wildlife professional, where is the need? Where am I needed here besides the job? Where can I do the most good? Where can I, do I need to look at partnerships? Do I need to look at involving myself, in the city governance? Do I need to look at volunteering to be on a board? How can I make myself most useful above and beyond this basic job that I have to do? Anybody remember that? Had y'all seen that before?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's where I'm from.
That's where you're from. Yeah. Wolf River, WMA, is where back before we had the incinerators that got hot enough to denature the prions associated with CWD. It's where we found the TWRA had land where we could bury those deer, which was our best, most immediate, affordable option for taking care of a whole bunch of deer, right? And somewhere, somehow, somebody got a hold of this fact and twisted it, and threw it in the face of a minority. What do you think about your state wildlife agency burying these zombie deer in your backyard? That was unfortunate, because what would be the response of a person really not educated on this topic at all? Well, I don't like it. I think it's horrible. I'm angry. I'm being discriminated against. Is anybody? Are you guys familiar with the concept of environmental justice? Okay. So if you're marginally, Audrey, I didn't get anything from you at all. Yes or no? Yes, a little bit, kind of, sort of. Kind of, sort of. Okay. So if you're marginally familiar with it, let me see if I can fill it in just a little bit more. Probably the guy considered the father of the environmental justice movement is Robert Bullard, who wrote this book in the 70s called Dumping in Dixie. And this is it's a sticky wicket. Sticky wicket.
Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't heard that before?
No.
I have.
That's British, I believe.
That's what we call one of the dogs at my work.
Sticky wicket?
His name is Wicked.
Wicket, okay. Yeah. All right, so you're poor. You graduate. You don't have much money, but you want to buy a house. The only place that you can afford to buy a house is in the area of the county that's the poorest area of the county. Why is it poor? Why is the value of the land so low? Usually because it's in the worst places. Right next to the airport, right downstream of the industrial center, right next to an old hazardous waste, Superfund hazardous waste site, where there might be health concerns, health hazards, where the quality of life is low, maybe in high crime districts, right? But when it comes to environmental quality, the health of the landscape, that's those places that have been degraded. That's the cheapest places. So who goes there? The poorest people, and that often includes minorities, right? So when you look at maps, we can turn that around the other way. Where do minorities live? Or where have they put airports? Where have they put the county dump? Where have they put toxic waste sites? Closest to where all the minorities live. Well, it's not like they put them there always because the minorities were there or the poor people were there. That kind of happened together all at the same time. Sometimes they did put them there. Sometimes they did put them there because this is the cheapest land, and we're not. The county has to buy a bunch of land for a landfill. They're going to go to where they can find the cheapest land, and the cheapest land is where the poorest people are living. So what happens is it exacerbates that issue of the poor people are getting dumped on, and that makes it even worse, and it just snowballs. So why do I even bring this all up? Because it's a consideration in wildlife management, and actually there is good that can come if we're aware of this. I'll give you an example. When we built the Greenway initially, it went from McDonald's to not quite all the way downtown. It stopped at some dead end street over there, and we had one last section to build, and we were trying to get the railroad to give up a piece of land, and it took several years to do it. We finally did, and while we were waiting to get that last chunk, there was a lot of discussion about where that greenway might wind out and end over there at Lindell Street. I was talking to somebody, and some people were saying, well, if it goes right through here, that would be easy, but there's some kind of rough houses, a lot of junk and trash in the yard, and it goes right by there. And would there be, questions of crime? Would people be afraid to walk on the greenway there? And that was, kind of what I'd heard, and I thought, yeah, that makes sense. And I shared that with somebody else in town. Is actually Sam Goyrette, who's president of the Northwest Tennessee Local Foods Network and the wife of Joaquin Goyrette, a biology professor here. And she said, Eric, I think that'd be a perfect place for the greenway to go. And I said, okay, why is that? She said, because it's going to end out right over behind the farmer's market. And what that's going to do is provide these people living in poverty, a place to exercise safely, more safely than in their neighborhood, and B, a place to easily walk to get to the farmer's market to get fresh food and fresh produce at a low price. Who are we serving here, if not those people? Like, damn, I was humbled. She's right, and I was wrong. And yes, that question remains: might some people be afraid, to walk through that area? Well, we might have to keep an eye on it and hopefully police it if it needs it. But problems never materialized. It never has been a problem. So we can recognize that putting greenways through these areas, putting parks, wildlife management areas, partnering with city parks, partnering with Tennessee state natural areas, partnering with state parks, and creating areas where people can come recreate and enjoy the outdoors. People from an urban environment who don't easily have a way to get to the outdoors and enjoy them. Because isn't that what we're always talking about? We need to provide access to wildlife and the outdoors, especially to people who don't easily have that access. Who, if not these people, right? So rather than think of this as a liability and look at that and roll our eyes and go, oh brother, can we go, how can we help these people? How can we bring them in and partner with them and let them be advocates for wildlife and protecting nature, right? So can we turn liability into asset? I think y'all, most of you have been in a class or two over the years where you've heard me, say that a lot of states, of course, the partners of our state wildlife agencies have always been first and foremost hunters and anglers. That's who they serve. That's who pay the bills. You dance with the one what brung you. But we're realizing that the majority of people don't hunt and fish, and if all we serve as hunters and anglers, we're serving a shrinking base, and we, of course, we must continue to serve hunters and anglers. And actually, I'm more interested in serving wildlife, including game species, and hunters and anglers will benefit. But if we serve all wildlife, we'll serve not just hunters and anglers, but all people. So I think it's important that wildlife agencies broaden their base. We have to not turn our backs on, and yet I often hear the argument, well, we should charge WMA fees for people to go bird watching, or for people to go hiking on WMAs. And we could, but what those people will do is say, I think I'll go to the city parks instead, they're free. And I'm not gonna get shot by a dumb hunter. Right? Yeah. And we're not gonna gain anything by doing that. And what we will lose is the faith and cooperation of the 95% of people who don't hunt and fish. We need more funding, but I would argue that non-hunters and non-anglers will be happy to help foot the bill for taking care of wildlife if we can just figure out the way to do it, whether it's through WILDWA or teaming with wildlife or whatever. And that's an argument for another day. But those partners that we could look for could be the city and the county administrators, the city parks, state natural areas, the zoning commissions, the extension service, the UT extension service, 4-H, FFA, and we do partner with them to some degree. School systems, we do partner with them to some degree. Industries, partnering with Tyson Foods, with the, I forget the name, what's the new name of the lawnmower place? With local businesses, with civic organizations, the Rotary Club and the others, with non-governmental organizations and nonprofits, partnering with all of these people, and rather than saying, we're here for the hunters and anglers, you guys knock yourselves out. Guys, there's not enough land left for wildlife. We've got to take advantage of every opportunity, partner with everybody to use all of it to the best of our ability. Damage management. This is an industry that we see growing up more and more in towns. The bigger the town, the more we see them. These can be large nationwide companies that put up branch offices in large cities all over the country. They can be regional. They can be just one business in one city. That one business in one city could be an office with a dozen, 2 dozen people working in it, or it could be a Bubba with a pickup truck full of traps. And they can range from very professional to very not professional. I think it's important that our profession recognizes them, but stresses the importance of legitimacy. All of you guys in the 4-year program are going to be certifiable by the Wildlife Society when you graduate, and that's valuable regardless. But I don't think it's anywhere more valuable than if you go into private industry. If you're wearing the uniform that says TWRA on the shoulder, that in and of itself gives you some degree of legitimacy. Now, there's plenty of people out there that just don't like the government, whatever. But overall, you are given legitimacy by virtue of your employer. But if you work for yourself, that legitimacy has to come from elsewhere. And one place that it can come from is from certification by a professional society, right? This is Randy Wolf. He's a graduate of UT Knoxville in the 1970s. And after he graduated, he founded a company in Knoxville called Varmint Busters. For the next 45 years, he ran a company with several employees. And what I really appreciate about Randy, he's just a good old boy. But what I appreciate about Randy is that every year he came to the Tennessee State Chapter of the Wildlife Society meeting and sat in on every talk and kept himself current. He was a member of the Wildlife Society. He subscribed to the Journal of Wildlife Management and the Wildlife Society Bulletin. He read the articles. He's a certified wildlife biologist, and he wanted to keep himself current as a knowledgeable wildlife professional who understood emerging knowledge, emerging research, emerging trends. And I think that's great. If our wildlife profession can point to folks like them when somebody says, I got a skunk under my house, I got a bunch of bats in my barn, I got a raccoon foaming at the mouth out of the swimming pool, what do? Call this guy right here, call Randy. You guys heard of the donut hole effect? So, you got a city, and in the center of the city is downtown, and you know, back in the old days, downtown was all the mom and pa shops, right? The local businesses, and then along comes Walmart, right? And they build on the outside of town. And what happens, you know, they run, you know, some of those mom and pa shops out of business, right? And of course, downtown was always the most valuable real estate in the town. So the property is valuable, the property taxes are higher here, everything's more expensive downtown, okay? Mom and pop go out of business and they can't sell their store and they can't rent their store because it's too expensive. All the new stores are going up around Walmart, right? Does anybody know where the first Walmart was in Martin, Tennessee?
Downtown Martin.
It was it?
No, that's the whole thing. Walmart never builds downtown. They always build outside of town.
It wasn't the Rural King, was it?
Mm.
No, it was near that one. No, it was near that Dollar General.
Which one?
Not
Where?
Yeah.
not the one that's near like
The old
Subway or the new one, but like the one that's kind of outside of town.
The building with the hummingbird on it, with the painted hummingbird.
Where's
Near-
that?
Not that building, near
Is
that
it
building.
near like MTD or whatever it's called now?
West of town? No. Or east of town? No.
I remember there used to be a Walmart just down from the Martin Police Station.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys know where the Martin Police Station is?
Yeah.
Up North Lindell, north
Yeah.
of town?
Yeah,
That's where it was. Yeah,
that's
where
what I
that
meant.
big empty lot is. That big huge building with the empty
Yeah.
parking lot. Yeah. That's where it used to be, right? And that is when Martin built all that stuff up North Lindell. Okay? All right. And then what happened? Martin built where the Rural King is now, right? And all that stuff on North Lindell turned into a bunch of pawn shops and used cars and tanning salons and low rent places. And then all the stuff started building up over here, right? And then they built the new one, Super Walmart out, and it's building on out slowly out that way now, right? And what's happening to downtown? Downtown becomes lower and lower and lower rent. All these businesses are being driven out of business, and cities end out with a downtown that can attract new businesses, that rates are high, nobody wants to come in, they're not making any money, and they don't know what to do, right? And what happens? The city just keeps on growing out. So you have suburban sprawl that just gets worse and worse. That's a phenomenon everywhere, all over the United States. There have been some states that have put severe restrictions on big box stores like Walmart's just to keep that from happening, right? But you know, are there other things that you can do? The state of Maryland, a few decades ago, started what they call their Smart Growth Initiative. And it was to combat just this sort of donut hole effect. And it included just a variety of policies and laws and initiatives to try to keep a city kind of high and tight, to minimize outward expansion and suburban sprawl, suburban growth. So, you know, the city would lower the tax rates. They would provide discounts on water and electric bills downtown. They would provide free trash pickup, you know, to these businesses downtown. And they elevated those on the outskirts of town and tried to make it to where if you're gonna, I mean, they didn't make it against the law. If a Walmart's gonna come in, it's gonna come in. But if you're gonna pay for it, it's gonna cost you. So they tried to create a bit of a disincentive and on continuing to grow out and trying to really strongly encourage them to keep it in the middle, providing public transportation so that people could easily get to those places without having to worry about expensive parking and all that other stuff. And I think that that's valuable. Is that necessarily a place for the wildlife profession to be heavily involved? Not necessarily, but they could be a voice at the table. So where, you know, the profession is, and I think a good place to start is usually where the state wildlife agency is headquartered. That's often the state capital city. And that capital city is usually pretty good size, and that could be kind of a model for, okay, how can the agency, or at least the profession, partner with the urban planners to develop smart growth policies that make sense not just for the people and the businesses and the economy, but also makes sense for the movement of wildlife. Some people argue that you know, if we can keep our city high and tight, like a marine haircut, then that minimizes habitat loss around the city. Other people argue that, well, a city's going to grow, and you can keep it as high and tight as you want, but what you're going to have in those city boundaries is zero wildlife habitat. And it might be better to do some combination of trying to limit sprawl, to minimize sprawl, but at the same time get parks and greenways and progressive bridges and smart buildings that allow wildlife to live in the city and move through the city with minimal impact. And so some combination of both might make sense, right? It's all about planning, and you know, it's no one entity's responsibility, but as a profession, if we can keep an eye out for opportunities to identify what are our goals for wildlife. Is it to manage damage from deer vehicle collisions, from disease, from you know, humans impacting this particular endangered species or whatever? Identify what are our species of concern? Do we have endangered species here? Do we have species that are causing an inordinate amount of damage to human property, right? What are the distributions, and how are those distributions of those species being impacted by our cities, by our urban areas? And how are they impacting us as people? What are the common species? And what are the issues and what are the benefits of those common species? And how do we maximize those benefits and minimize the issues? Are there species that we would like to see? Are there opportunities here to reintroduce species, like this peregrine falcon that has been reintroduced to several cities and does very well, and at the same time and delights the residents of the high rises and helps keep the pigeon population steady? Are there other things? It's gonna fall ultimately on our state and federal wildlife agency, and particularly our state wildlife agency administrations, to work to look for opportunities for our profession to take on these growing challenges in this growing part of our landscape. Y'all stayed awake the whole time. I'm very proud of you. Thank you for that. Good. I hope it wasn't too painful. Good. Okay. Good. Let's talk about. Do you like the peregrine and the flower blocks? I like it too. Let's talk about presentations. Yeah.
With this topic, I really just want